I was in Smith's a few weeks ago, and my eye turned to a magazine that I used to buy quite regularly. My first degree was in biochemistry, and I used to be an avid reader of The New Scientist. It's a great way to just see the breadth of science. Though you were in a very small area, I was in proteins, was my specialism within biochemistry, which is utterly useless to most people in the real world. But you could see what other scientists were doing with their specialism. But I was drawn to a particular front page, and it said this: "Alone in a crowd. Why so many people feel lonely, but no one's talking about it." I was drawn to this because I knew that actually this wasn't going to be a little half page or a short piece. Actually, this was about 15, 20 pages worth of the magazine. And I found that there was some really quite shocking research that's been done. You may have noticed in smaller things in the newspapers, this piece of research is coming through. So I opened it up and I found the first page of the main article. And it had this little experiment. So young, old, imagine this. You are a zookeeper and you have been tasked to set up an enclosure. And your enclosure is an enclosure for humans. So what one thing are you going to do that is going to make it work? Are you going to have a good water supply? Because we can't survive for more than 3 days without water, or some good food, or a really nice house. People would really like a nice shelter, maybe. But actually, the scientist who has brought together all this research said, actually, that overlooks the greatest thing that people need, and that is connection with other people. If you put one person in your amazing palace that you built with really nice food and really nice water, it wouldn't work very well. Or if you put lots of people in, but you didn't put, board games or meeting places, your zoo enclosure for humans would break down really quickly. I don't know if any of you watched it started a long time ago, but has almost finished, or just finished now, the Channel 4 documentaries, Eden. Anyone watch it? Maybe I'm on my own. So a couple of years ago, they put out adverts, and they said, we're looking for 20 highly skilled volunteers to build utopia in a remote community. So they took an area up in Scotland. All the things you have to learn as Kira. It's because I'm pulling it tight. So they had to build a community, and they got a carpenter, they got a shepherdess with some sheep, they got a gardener to build a vegetable patch, they had a plumber who'd sort out the water supplies, and everything was going really well. They did about 4 episodes, and then they cut the whole series, and everyone went, what's gone on? And they've just, like a year and a half later, released what happened. And they actually changed the title of the whole program. It would originally be called Eden, let's set up the new creation, New Eden. But they cancelled everything and called it, what did they call it? Eden Paradise Lost. It all went downhill. The carpenter built his house, the shepherdess looked after her sheep, the gardener looked after her garden. No one liked each other. In fact, people just drove each other away, and people just left the show, and by the end, they had less than half the people they started with. And it was an utter disaster. I think they overlooked something that this article was saying. They thought that they would build community by building houses, but actually that wasn't the way to build a community. So in our reading, we have a very strange moment just in the 3rd chapter of Genesis. A very, very short moment. If you know the story, you have creation at the beginning, and Adam starts on his own in the garden. But he's alone, and actually this is described as being not good. And Eve is brought as a helper, as a friend for Adam, so that he's not alone. And yet, in the 3rd chapter, we have God coming into the garden, but due to their own actions and how they feel, they choose one of the most astonishing, startling moments of all history, in my opinion, that in a moment when they could have met with God, instead they chose to hide. So why would you choose loneliness? Why would you choose to hide from anyone, from God, or from each other? What is this loneliness? The article put it this way. It said, loneliness is often assumed to be a problem of social isolation, one that predominantly affects the elderly, vulnerable, people with no friends or family, and people who can rarely leave home. And in truth, this can be the case. People can be hugely socially isolated when they're not able to leave home. But it said that loneliness doesn't have to have anything to do with this. It puts it in a very interesting way. It says, it's not about social isolation. It's about the feeling of social isolation. So it's not about being stuck on an island on your own necessarily, though that can happen if you're elderly and you find it difficult to move. But actually, you can be in a busy room, you can have lots of friends, lots of people around you, and actually still feel just as isolated. So if we go back to that moment in Genesis, that at the beginning of the story, Adam is on his own, and Adam is alone, and that is described as bad. But then suddenly, Adam and Eve are in the garden, they have an opportunity to meet with God, and yet they choose an isolation, choose to hide. I don't know how you read the story of Genesis. It is a story of creation, it is a story of beginnings, but it's also a story of connection and a story of loss of connection. Do we read ourselves into these stories? Adam starts on his own. He has then a compatriot. They choose to hide. Later on, their children, Cain and Abel, can't get on, and one ends up killing the other. So you have isolation from God, and you have isolation from each other. Throughout Genesis and throughout the whole Bible, I think often there are stories of this connection and stories of loss of connection. Sin is often seen as quite a difficult word to understand in modern life. But have you ever thought of it like this, that sin is separation? It's not a perfect definition, but Adam and Eve sinned against God, and what do? They try and hide. Cain killed his brother because of jealousy, and they're forever separated due to their actions. It seems that when things are going well, we're connected. And that when things break down, we seem to lose that connection. We lose connection with others due to arguments, disagreements, and we lose a connection with God as well. So what's the solution? In the article, it says a lonely person will not feel less so simply by surrounding them with other individuals. And similarly, someone who they describe as socially enfranchised, someone who would feel they have lots of friends, feel like they're doing well. They're not going to feel lonely just because you put them in a room on their own for a day, unless they're really extroverted. They might struggle then. But loneliness seems to be much more complicated than whether you're with people or whether you're not with people. So it almost seems like a symptom that either something is going well in life or a symptom that things aren't right. So it seems we long for this connection, and when we lose it, either with God or with each other, we seem to feel this hollow feeling, an empty feeling that things aren't quite right. So in this article, if they just suddenly said loneliness is a problem, it probably wouldn't have gained the momentum that it had. But actually what they did is they took 150 different studies. Most of these were nothing to do with loneliness originally, but often they'll have had a question about it. They might have been about smoking, about alcohol, about inactivity. And they went to look back at all the results and see if they'd overlooked something. And they realized that they had massively overlooked the concept of loneliness. And to their surprise, that actually loneliness would potentially have the same negative scientific impact as smoking, as obesity, and as inactivity. Put simply, if you allow loneliness to take hold in your life, it could be as bad for your health as smoking, as obesity. It could actually make you as likely to become ill. It could shorten your lifespan as much as these things that we're always told in the media are bad for us. We all know that drinking too much or smoking are bad for us. How often are we told that actually loneliness could actually be seriously bad for our health? Interestingly enough, though, they say that this could be potentially the cheapest, the easiest thing for us to sort out. So we all know that smoking, drinking, not getting enough exercise are bad for us. The big news is actually that loneliness is not just, as it was described as something that they always thought was a nuisance, but actually it is seriously dangerous for us. So what does the church and our community have to offer? Our second reading was a short and quite condensed reading from Hebrews. It mentions, let mutual love continue between you. The people who are around us in this church, in this community, do we love them? Do we look out for them? Do we show hospitality to strangers? It has that strange moment. You might just be entertaining angels without knowing it. I don't know if that will ever happen, but it's the idea that you don't know when a person enters your community who they are. They could be an angel, they could be someone who is dreadfully lonely. But also not just people who are maybe new to a community, someone who may have been here for decades, may have slowly become more and more isolated. Now, are we looking out for those people? It talks about marriage and the family unit. Are we really investing in that and all that it means to be in a family? And then, strangely, it might seem at the end, it says, don't be consumed with the love of money. Why would it talk about money suddenly in a section about love and hospitality? I think it's tacked on there because it doesn't matter if the fear of not having enough money or the desire to constantly be finding more money will take our eyes off the desire for our community to the desire for others. Are we allowing anything in our life to take our minds off the people who are directly around us, our family, our church, our community? Are we genuinely putting them first? So it's quite a wide and broad list that I chose, but I saw it as overcoming something that we had seen in Genesis, the isolation that was caused, the sin, the separation. By the time we get to the New Testament through Jesus, who is able to bridge that gap of separation, and through the church, we're able to overcome some of those problems that we've seen right from the beginning. So, are we connected to the people who are around us? Interestingly, do we like the people around us? If we don't like the people around us, this is difficult, but are we willing to overlook some of the challenges because the need of the community is so great? Are you feeling socially isolated today? If so, I'd really encourage you to talk to someone, to meet with people. If you're feeling you're not isolated, are you looking out for those who might be? In the notices, it was mentioned that we're going to be going into hub groups. That's a great way to actually meet people on a really good place. On a Sunday, we spend a little bit of time together, but it's so many of us actually join a small group of 10, 15 people and really get to know them. I'd really encourage hub groups as a way of getting to know people. And as Dave said, the alpha groups that are joining, are we, if you're looking for one that you don't know about, think about joining alpha. So, science seems to have caught up with something that actually I think the church has always known, though I'm not sure we've always pretended that we've known. So, isolation from God and from one another is pretty serious. We've always known that it would affect our mental health, but actually it affects our physical health and it affects our spiritual health as well. So we'll need to live as people who are connected both to God and to one another. Amen.
Thank you so much, Roland. Isn't that fascinating that you can be in a room full of people and still be alone? I wonder if you've had that experience. And isn't it fascinating that you can be in the same space as God, like Adam and Eve, but hiding, like behind a tree or something? And I find that fascinating as well. And I think it's up to each one of us to respond to that. I think it starts in the next 90 seconds. Do we make eye contact with one another, or do we hide away? Do we turn our backs to people that we don't know, or do we say hello to them? As a church, our responsibility is to be to others as God is to us, which is open, welcoming, forgiving, loving, and to provide spaces where whoever you are, whatever your background, you're welcome. Just as these children are welcome, you're welcome to come and find your place and bring an end to loneliness. So I invite you, you are genuinely invited to come and be welcomed, to come and join a group and get to know people, to stay for coffee after the service,